Good morning, everyone, or afternoon, depending on where you are. My name is Betsy Cooper, and I'm the director of the Aspen Tech Policy Hub, an incubator training technologists how to do policy. We were completing our winter fellowship cohort when the shutdowns across the country due to COVID-19 kicked off. We didn't want to rest on our laurels, so we decided we needed to do something. We had a rainy day fund set aside in case of disaster, and this felt like the precise moment in which to use it to help get technology and tech policy working towards mitigating the worst effects of COVID-19. We were extremely pleased that the Ford Foundation and a Midyar network decided to jump in and help us expand and grow the pool. And we were able to fund 6 amazing projects, the first 2 of which we are releasing here today. These projects focus on mitigating social isolation, first in the art space and second in education. A brief run of show. First, each team of grant recipients will present for about 10 minutes. Then we are thrilled to have keynote speakers Stephen Zucker and Beth Harris from Smarthistory to respond to the projects and help us put this all into context. A few logistical notes. We'd love to collect your questions and share them with the panelists. You can use the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen to ask those questions, and we'll make sure to leave plenty of time at the end to respond to them. Second, the grantees are releasing their products live on our website, so check the chat button at the bottom of your screen, and we'll make sure to include the links so you can follow along in real time as they're presenting. So first up, we're very excited to introduce Michael Peter Edson, former Director of Web and New Media Strategy for the Smithsonian Institution, and Dana Mitroff-Silvers, former Head of Digital at the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art. Their project, Cultural Engagement to Mitigate Social Isolation, focuses on helping galleries, libraries, museums, and archives manage the effects of COVID-19 and later anti-racism work. In order to see what they've learned, let's kick it over to them. So I'm very excited to introduce Michael and Dana.
Hi, everyone. I'm Michael Peter Edson. Thanks for that great introduction, Betsy. And Dana Mitroff-Silvers is on the other line.
Good morning or good afternoon, everybody.
And I'm going to share my screen here and kick off our brief presentation. That should work. So, we started this project in a pandemic, and it's not easy to start new programs in the middle of a pandemic and social upheaval, particularly for cultural and community organizations who have limited resources for training in circumstances like this. But in fact, maybe ironically, this is the exact moment when institutions and organizations like this need to be working their hardest, need to take risks, need to be creative, and need to find new ways to serve their communities. So Dana and I jumped on the chance to apply for a grant from the Aspen Tech Policy Hub to see if we could help community-based cultural institutions, galleries, libraries, archives, museums, we call those GLAMs in the biz, and also performing arts institutions, create some new community-focused initiatives, as the call for proposals put it, to use technology to mitigate the effects of social isolation caused by COVID-19. But you may ask, why work with culture in the middle of a crisis? Isn't culture just symphonies, orchestras, and ballets, leisure time for affluent people? In our work, Dana and I have always taken a more expansive view of what culture is. We think of culture in terms of broader, everyday creative life lived by individuals and their communities every day. And we believe that cultural institutions embedded in thousands of communities around the US have an enormous potential to add to the quality of life, support and deepen civic processes like debate and dialogue, knowledge creation, the development of moral and emotional well-being, the development of resilience, and the increasing of community ties. These are the kinds of qualities that America needs now. GLAM and cultural institutions are among the most trusted institutions in the world. And with cultural institutions, big and small, we have a well-placed network that is, in principle, eager to serve these needs, but they need help. Dana and I, after, I think we figured, Dana, we have 50 years in museum technology, cultural technology business together. We also believe that technology is an important and vital force in society, but it needs to be used with intent and focus. Clearly, the events of the last few years have shown us that if not used with intent and focus, it can be bad for society. So, with all of this in our minds, we designed a project that could bring a group of cultural institutions together to see if we could find small, not one big way, but lots of small ways to serve communities in a time of civic need. Here's how it went down. We brought together 18 individuals from 7 museums, 1 public library system, 1 performing arts organization, and a nonprofit to take part in the project. Together, these institutions every year serve over 4 million Americans in their communities. We shared money, we shared the grant money with the participants. We used Lego Serious Play and design thinking methodologies over Zoom to facilitate reflection, collaboration, and sense making within the group. We helped participants to develop small, tactical tech projects to serve community needs. Day to day, week to week in the project, we went between highly facilitated design thinking and serious play activities down to one-to-one and small group facilitation over Zoom to help participants see their own personal needs, community needs, and institutional strategies in new perspectives. There was a lot of fun. Betsy, I think, said she'd never seen participants tweet that they had a great time on a Zoom call before. We had a lot of that, and that was really crucial to our design, as Dana will tell you about. Again, scenes from the play that we put together, Lego Serious Play and design thinking processes that many of you are familiar with. In particular, participants were very grateful to have an opportunity to step out of the normal grind of Zoom and think and relate to each other in new ways. The day before our project kicked off, George Floyd was killed in Minneapolis, Minnesota, where 5 of our participants in 2 of the institutions were based. It was devastating to them and all of us, and continues to be so. We expanded the scope naturally to include social justice work and deeper, longer-term thinking about what it means to be a civic and cultural institution in a time of great societal need. What we worked on, this is a drive-by. I just want to, Dana and I are our core facilitators and connectors. It isn't about our work, it's about the work the participants' families did together. So with Arts and Minds, NGO that works on using museum programs to serve patients with dementia and their caregivers, they developed new programs in Spanish and tuned their programs to work in a distance learning environment. The Akron Public Library System worked on virtual services with and for teenagers. Here, I need to adjust my window a second so I can see my own notes. There we go. The Center for Art and Public Exchange and the Mississippi Museum of Art in Jackson, Mississippi re-strategized their social justice engagement policies and programs. The Lux Art Institute in Southern California worked on fast and flexible access online and in their summer camps and on their physical grounds during the shutdown. The Newark Museum of Art focused their attention on a community day, a virtual community day in commemoration of the 1967 Newark uprising. Red Eye Theater in Minneapolis was really set back on their heels by the George Floyd killing. They stepped way back and looked at their community service and engagement strategy, as did the Weizmann Art Museum on the University of Minnesota campus. Maybe more than the cumulative impact on projects by these institutions, on an individual basis, the participants told us that this process of engagement and facilitation and listening helped them think about working with speed and confidence on community-oriented projects that would have impact, particularly in the domain of social justice, diversity, equity, access, and inclusion. particularly the confidence aspect, knowing where they were, what they could do, what they could accomplish, and having the willpower to move forward was incredibly important to me and Dana, and I think the other participants. So I'm going to hand it over to Dana to bring it home with key observations and takeaways.
All right, thanks, Mike. So the following are 5 observations and takeaways from our participation in the project. So the first one is that defining the right problem is really essential. And this is about defining for whom you're doing what you're doing and what you're going to focus on and design for. So for example, the Georgia O'Keeffe Museum in Santa Fe was originally intending to design a new program for out-of-town visitors, but after building a model of this visitor and doing some prototyping, they realized that they were focusing on a visitor that they already knew how to serve. So they shifted their focus to a Spanish-speaking elementary age student who was at home doing distance learning. And this was a real key moment for them to define the right need and the right problem. Next slide, please. So a second takeaway we had is that low tech can be really powerful too. So in our project, we urge our participants to leverage existing platforms like email, text messaging, video conferencing, and even the good old-fashioned US Postal Service. And they were able to move their projects forward using these cheap and accessible solutions. So for example, the organization Arts and Minds actually mailed physical packages of materials to constituents. And the Weissman Art Museum in Minneapolis used email to reach out to local student activists. Next slide, please. So another takeaway we had is that it's really important to limit cognitive demands during times of stress. So our participants, like everybody in the world, were going through a lot. There were a lot of stresses, a lot of demands on everybody. Everyone was overloaded. So we realized we needed to limit our cognitive demands on them. So we took this into account and we made a real effort to dial down the complexity and pace of our demands on participants. And we really were mindful to build in time for reflection, sense making, and we found this was really highly valued by the participants. Next slide, please. We also found that a nimble and fast approach can actually be quite difficult. People think nimble and fast are easier, but working this way is a skill and an art that needs to be learned and practiced. So throughout the project, we used various design thinking and Lego serious play methodologies to get people in the habit of thinking, building, and doing really quickly. Next slide, please. Another observation we had is that organizations don't magically change in a crisis. And when things get tough, organizations fall back on old habits. And this is especially true for cultural institutions, which tend to be traditional and risk averse in their methods. So for example, one of our participants had a prototype for an initiative to serve a neglected community. They were ready to roll it out, and then leadership announced a policy prohibiting new forms of community engagement. So we found that not having the authority to drive change was an issue for our participants. But we found that an approach that we called hacking existing programs could really be successful. This was about adding new elements, new content, or new formats to things that were already in process and under their control and purview. And this was a way to get new ideas out there faster within their sphere of influence. Next slide, please. Lastly, we found that lightweight grant making is a good thing. We're really grateful to the Aspen Tech Policy Hub for these COVID-19 grants. The low reporting requirements, the quick turnaround, the low amounts of paperwork was a great thing to allow us to fit a project like this into our busy schedules and put it out there into the world. And we were able to use the funds from the project to generate hundreds of hours of new work and thinking in our professional community. And we feel this work is going to have an impact across the communities that all of these organizations and institutions serve. Next slide. You can use these techniques in your own work on the Aspen Tech Policy website. We have some materials you can download. One of them is a design principles guide with some practical steps on how to do this in your own organization. You can find our slides in a longer report, so you can try this in your own work. Next slide, please. Of course, we want to thank the Aspen Tech Policy Hub for this, the Ford Foundation, the Mid-Year Network, and all of the participants in our project who were so phenomenal and such a pleasure to work with. And last slide, and thank you everybody. Here's our contact information, and we will be here for the Q&A, and we're also happy to respond to emails from people offline, and I'm going to send it back to you, Betsy.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for this amazing work. It's really important for the Hub and for all of our partners to think about tech policy in new ways beyond just the typical issues. And I think Michael and Dana's work really shows how using digital engagement and sometimes not so digital engagement can make a difference in unexpected places. So we're extremely thrilled that you joined us as COVID-19 Challenge grantees. Just a reminder, if you have questions for Michael and Dana, we will definitely get to those at the end of the presentations. So please type your questions into the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen. And then if you're interested in learning more about their work, including the tips that they've provided and the retrospective report, please click on the link in the chat box. That will enable you to see the work that they've produced in real time. So next up, I'm excited to reintroduce our Winter 2020 Aspen Tech Policy Hub Fellow, Nidhi Habar, and her partner from the MIT Media Lab, Yusuf Ahmad. Nidhi and Yusuf work together to mitigate social isolation in the education system, giving schools new tools to share their work through social media platforms such as Instagram. It's especially important work in this time when many schools are going back on Zoom, not in person. And so we're very excited to share what they developed with you. So over to you, Nidhi and Yusuf, to tell us more.
Hi everyone, I'm Yusuf Ahmad. I'm here with Nidhi Habar. And today we're going to introduce you to the suggestion box, a toolkit that we've developed for school leaders to help them make decisions that are flexible, iterative, and inclusive of their communities and especially of non-dominant voices. Nidhi's gonna spend the second half of the presentation introducing you to the toolkit. But before we get there, I'm gonna spend a little bit of time talking you through some of the context and the broader problem space that we've been thinking about for quite a few years. So well before COVID, schools have been grappling with a host of challenges. I mean, there are questions around equity, access, and racism, made especially poignant with the recent movement for Black Lives. But there are also wide-ranging debates about the purpose of school, about the nature of school models, of new teaching and learning strategies that might better equip students, teachers for the 21st century. But amidst all these debates and amidst this urgency and need to create new change in schools, there's also a lot of resistance and barriers to change. Chief among them is that schools and education is a high-stakes game. After all, we're talking about schools and kids futures here. Because of that high stakes nature, there's often a lot of stigma around failure. I mean, the parents here, I'm sure you feel that stigma around your kids. Educators often feel it, and school leaders especially really feel that stigma. That stigma is often compounded by unreasonable expectations. People have different expectations for school, but we often find that those expectations are driven by the most privileged and the most loudest voices, often by certain PTA members, by certain town hall forums. They're often very exclusive, again, exclusive of non-dominant voices. Lastly, a long-standing challenge that schools have grappled with that has kind of been a barrier to shorter term, rapid experimentation have been long-term budget cycles. Planning typically happens on an annual cycle. It doesn't really afford the kind of lightweight, kind of iterative projects, just like this Aspen grant actually afforded. These problems are really compounded when we look at COVID-19. First and foremost, we're all dealing with a range of health and safety concerns. These health and safety concerns have, created a whole, situation of uncertainty. If you're outside the education system, I'm sure many of you are dealing with, personal uncertainty in your lives. That's compounded when you're thinking about designing, a supportive and safe and happy community for students, of all backgrounds. That's really hard though when you can't really see your students. As many schools have been remote, many communities that schools really are have been fragmented. It's really hard to understand how are students, how are their families experiencing this moment. And lastly, and I think most importantly, we're dealing with a moment where we're coming to terms with racial inequality and inequity in our country. That being said, this also presents an opportunity. First and foremost, in order to respond to the pandemic and its uncertainty, we need to have flexible planning. Right? This creates a chance to think about actually trying new things because that's what schools are doing. Moreover, we have relief from testing. My 9-year-old niece called me so excited, when she found out she didn't need to take her exam and instead could work on a Scratch programming project and do some artwork on the side. Lastly, we have an opportunity when it comes to technology. And I think this will really come to life when Nidhi's speaking, but most folks either kind of think about solutions in very technocentric ways or in ways where it's, oh, we're just going to use the same old tools. But as Nidhi will show us soon, there's also a middle way where we can think about both new tools and repurposing existing tools to support our goals, and in this case, supporting schools and experimenting thoughtfully and inclusively. Thinking about these opportunities and thinking about our work with educators around the world who've been trying to experiment for a long time, this leads us to our design question. How might we make it feel less scary for schools to try new things thoughtfully and inclusively? And with that, I'll hand it off to Nidhi.
Thank you, Yusuf. So the suggestion box was born out of the idea that schools could describe what they're trying in 2 very simple sentences in a way that enables them to focus on short-term learning and is accessible enough to involve students and families who are typically excluded from these processes. As Yusuf mentioned, we've worked with a lot of schools across many continents, and we've learned through that work how schools are always trying new things, beautiful, creative new things. Yet the culture around experimentation doesn't exist, and furthermore is not often encouraged, as Yusuf explained. Experimentation doesn't require schools to ignore the gravity of their decisions, but rather to embrace the spirit to unstick them, to make iterative decisions that better meet students' needs. So in partnership with school leaders and educators, we distilled the critical questions from a range of decision-making processes into a set of 4 questions. Who does it involve centers the impact and requires schools to be specific about not just the actor of a change, but also the students or family members who will be impacted. This is an important tool for evaluating decisions with a lens of equity. The next question, what might you try? The language here is critical, is focused on taking a small step that doesn't have to be perfect, and it goes hand in hand with the next one, for how long? We encourage schools to define the shortest period of time in which they can collect enough information to determine whether or not the thing that they're trying is working, whether they should continue. For some decisions, this could be as little as a few weeks, a quarter, a semester. You often don't need a full year. And last but most importantly is the why. This aligns all stakeholders around a common and transparent goal. It's nearly impossible, as many of you must know, to evaluate whether something is working well or to give useful feedback if you aren't in agreement about what you hope the decision will achieve. The challenge here then was finding a format that would provide enough structure for these questions, but be simple enough to be shared with others who were not involved in the decision-making process. That means no long decision report or analyses. The key was usability, motivation, and transparency. So often tools in education are designed not with all users in mind. The process of making and communicating decisions are overly complicated and exclude communities whom decisions impact the most. We worked with schools to understand these challenges and design a tool that focused on how it would be used and by whom. Schools described the 2-sentence plans to be simple, powerful, and liberating. So the sentence structure here is what you see on the screen, where schools can fill in the blanks of who will try what, for how long, and we hope this will achieve what. Now, this is a powerful communication tool in and of itself to transform the culture of decision-making within a school building, but when shared with a school's larger community, it has the power and simplicity to invite participation from non-dominant communities through its concise, focused, and accessible language. And this is where the technology comes in. So as Yusuf mentioned, COVID has created an opportunity to redefine forms of decision-making, to leverage technology when PTA meetings and town halls can't happen anymore. This is an opportunity for us to redefine our expectations about who should be at the table and choose a tool based on its familiarity to the people who are important in the process. We chose Instagram because we've seen it act as a community organizing tool over the last several months, more so than other forms of social media like Twitter or Facebook. And its structure was very conducive to sharing the 2 sentences. Schools can also use the description and comment section on Instagram to solicit meaningful feedback and perspectives from students and families. The questions then extend an invitation to strengthen connections between the school and its community. In this example, a school in Washington Heights organized volunteer tutors to support students for the first remote quarter. To know if it worked or not, they needed to look at more than just students' end of quarter grades or engagement in class. They asked students, did you like working with tutors? How could your tutor have helped you better? And they asked family members if they felt safe with their child's remote tutor. These questions help stakeholders provide feedback that can be used and gives them a place to start. And in a way that's already familiar and accessible to students and families, they can comment favorite perspectives that they want to amplify or privately message the school with feedback about their experience. hence the term suggestion box. Instagram is just one example, but it's important for schools to consider where their own communities are active digitally and meet them there. On our Instagram at Schools Learn Too, we showcase real two-sentence plans from schools who've used the method. Instagram also serves as an example of what a school's Instagram could look like, as a transparent display of decisions, welcoming feedback, and participation from the entire community. And beyond students and families, educators can also look to social media to see what other schools are trying in simple and accessible ways, creating a community of schools who are experimenting together. We know that that can feel a little bit scary for schools, but we promise that that's worth it. So to wrap things up, we've got a suite of resources to support educators using this method with their school, all up on our website. And the resources include a starter kit with how-tos for how to create your own two-sentence plans, a guide for using social media in school communities for community engagement, and then also an outreach flyer that schools can modify and use to share with students and families to invite them to participate, but also to set community guidelines for what healthy and safe discussions can look like on social media. We also developed this workshop that's available on our website that schools can use to develop their own set of two-sentence plans. We tested this workshop with over 50 school leaders in partnership with IDEO and invite others to borrow the workshop and adapt it to their own needs. It's been really exciting to see how schools are using it. So with that, please visit us here to learn more about the project or take it back to your school or district. We would love to feature your two-sentence plan on our Instagram or support you in any way that we can. We hope schools will use these tools in combination with the opportunities that arise in the midst of a lot of tragedy from this pandemic to redefine their culture of decision-making, to involve students and families who have been excluded for far too long, and to support each other in normalizing and celebrating the creative work that educators do every day. We want to say thank you so much to the educators, the advisors, and the collaborators who helped us conceive of this idea, and especially, of course, to the Aspen Tech Policy Hub and our funders for their generosity of making this happen. So with that, back to Betsy.
Thanks so much, Nidhi and Yusuf. We're extremely pleased to have this product released at this unique moment for online education. And we're very excited to see how many schools will take this on and use it to make a difference in communicating, which I know has been an extremely difficult time for many as we shift to mostly online education for the beginning of this school year. A quick reminder that if you have questions for our teams, please put them in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, and check the chat window as well so that you can actually see the products and start learning about how to make your own two-sentence suggestion box contributions. We always like to put into context the release of our products, and for this reason especially, I'm thrilled to introduce Stephen Zucker and Beth Harris of Smarthistory. Smarthistory provides world-class resources on art and cultural objects for learners from around the globe, and we're very excited to hear how they've reacted to these projects we've released and can help us think about the broader impacts that they may have. So with that, I'm thrilled to introduce Stephen and Beth as our keynotes for this session.
Thank you so much for that introduction. It was incredible listening to those presentations. Beth and I think, both recognized a tremendous amount of what was offered as strategies that were really largely responsible for the success of the project that we work on, Smarthistory. The idea of small defined goals, of not taking on too much at a time, of flexible iterative planning, and especially attention to non-dominant communities. These are all issues that I think are critical to us, and it was marvelous to think about the way that tools can be built and opportunities can be made to offer pathways for cultural institutions and for learning institutions. So, so thank you so much. Beth, did you have anything you wanted to add right at the start?
Yeah, sure. I was just really, the idea of sort of removing the stigma of failure that came up in Nidhi and Yusuf's presentation really struck home for me, because for those of you who don't know Smarthistory, Stephen and I do our art history, we do what we do in the classroom publicly. And sometimes when I lie awake at night and can't sleep, that idea absolutely terrifies me. Professors don't normally do what they do in public and open themselves up to the kind of public stigma that's possible, especially I think sometimes in the academy. And so being kind of fearless in that way, and also I think being generous with our colleagues, allowing for failure, allowing for errors, and just being open to things being imperfect is so important, especially today. So that really struck home for me. Should we move to talking about Smarthistory a little bit and how these issues that we're talking about sort of play out for us with Smarthistory?
I think so. Let's start with a tweet that we received sometime in the blur that is the last 6 months. Somebody wrote to us, honestly, reading and watching Smarthistory content is part of my quarantine routine now. Can't wait until the pandemic is over though, so I can visit museums again. And in addition to that, and many other tweets, the London Times, the Washington Post, and lots of other news sites have written about Smarthistory as a to-do during quarantine, as a way of sort of overcoming the isolation. And I think that this is this is true because of, in a sense, many of the strategies that we've just heard outlined.
Yeah, and Smarthistory was already successful beyond our wildest dreams. We started Smarthistory 15 years ago, just for our own students. But in the last 5 or 6 months since the start of the pandemic, we've seen a huge increase in use of Smarthistory. So we're just really happy that we can be there for people when they need us. And in fact, we're seeing basically an 80% increase year over year, which is phenomenal. And just yesterday, we did these numbers just before we got online. Smarthistory had 200,000 page views. And so that translates to tens of thousands of people in just one day that were helped by Smarthistory. Of course, when we taught in the classroom, we taught just a few hundred students a year, and now obviously we're reaching many, many more than that. And this is really an aggregate of 2 primary audiences that Smarthistory has. One is informal learners, those who are, museum goers, people who travel, people who are just interested in art, who just like to learn. And the other is formal learners, teachers, both teachers and students in formal academic environments.
Let's start with the informal learners. And one of the questions we ask ourselves is, why would informal learners come to Smarthistory to learn about art's brilliant histories, and as a way of overcoming the isolation of the pandemic?
Well, I think one of the things that we offer is the ability to come away really having learned something. So, 5 or 6 minutes and you've listened to an expert talk about something likely that's incredibly beautiful and wonderful. And you come away and you've really learned something in a short amount of time.
Smarthistory also, though, we attempt to transport the visitor to the piece, to the work of art, to the archaeological site, wherever it is in the world. And so it's a way of getting out of your home space, of your quarantine space. And we do this a couple of different ways. We always record on site. And the audio conveys the space. If it's the footsteps in a vaulted church, if it's the birds overhead at an archaeological site. And of course, the photography does this as well.
Yeah, and I think that idea is important, because what Stephen is talking about is really something imperfect, right? We're recording on, in a museum where there's people around us, where there's some noise, where there's sometimes children who are making unpleasant noises, or on the Acropolis where the gravel makes a lot of sound that wasn't expected. And so, not producing things that are absolutely perfect, but that are incredibly useful. So,
and let me just jump in on that for just 1 second and say that this re-embeds the work of art in a world that people recognize. Unlike, for instance, the way a photograph might be seen in a textbook, isolated, a sort of perfect view of an image, we're looking up at it and we might see a worshiper or we might see a museum guard. And so there is this way in which the object still functions as a real thing in the world.
And we believe that informal learners come to the site because of the sense of empathy that art history can provide with people who are far away from us, both in time and in distance. And so that feeling of coming together, of empathy, I think is something that we're all feeling a need for at this moment. And art history can do that.
So another question we're asking is, beyond the informal learners, why are teachers and students visiting Smart History in these kind of numbers that we've never seen before?
Yeah, I mean, obviously everyone is had to turn to online learning in a way that was really difficult and disturbing for so many teachers and students, and really, really challenging. And Smart History we're a not-for-profit, we're ad-free, we're reliable. The content was created by hundreds of experts, and it's content that's specifically made for teaching and learning our discipline, the discipline of art history.
I want to pick up on that last point though for a moment. I think another reason is that the content that we provide on Smart History is specifically made for the web. And I think that is inherently stronger than content that is, in a sense, repurposed from the face-to-face, that is being translated into the online environment. And I think that there is something very powerful about creating content that is sort of at home on the web.
So what has COVID changed for Smart History, for what we're doing every day? Well, as we mentioned, we've got millions of learners online looking at Smart History content. So we're working to create more and more content that can be useful for them, and deliver that in a way that is most useful. So are there new content types that we can create that would help teachers and students more immediately, perhaps?
I think there's a new urgency to diversify our field and to broaden the content that we teach. And this is something that we heard in both of the presentations before. I think it was put beautifully with the phrase non-dominant communities. And this is something that's important to us, both in terms of the type of work that we're presenting on Smart History, but also the voices that are presenting it. And our global ambition is central to this idea of having voices of expertise from around the world presenting that work.
And one of the things that happened after COVID was that we heard from a bunch of our colleagues in museums, and there was a new recognition of the importance of digital audiences. And that was really a wonderful thing for us because, of course, that's our bread and butter. And so it was nice to see that kind of refocusing on digital audiences. And that's something that we hope will continue after the worst parts of the pandemic are over.
Okay, so how did Smart History get here in this position where we could be sort of utilized at this moment of crisis, and how are we going to move forward in this environment? I want to go back to some of the issues that were raised in the presentations, and that is the idea of openness, of collaboration, of access, of reaching out. Smart History was founded 15 years ago in 2005, the same year that YouTube began. And I think that we founded it very much trying to think about how we could break down the wall of our classroom, how we could invite other professors in, how we could bring our students the best possible content. I'm not sure that I should have been the one lecturing on Leonardo when there was somebody out there who could do a much better job than me. Why couldn't I go out and bring that person to my students?
So smart history is public art history, and we like this idea of public art history a lot. And we now offer 1,000 videos, more than 2,000 essays. We give everything away. There are 10,000 high-resolution images on Flickr that are available for teaching and learning, all with a Creative Commons license. We're adding more content every week.
As the presenter said, the iterative is critical, and this has been central to our strategy. We try lots of things. We make lots of things, and it's a little bit embarrassing to admit it here, but we break lots of things, and I think we're kind of proud of that.
Yeah, and we work with lots of people. We work with cultural organizations, museums, GLAMs, archaeologists, conservators. We enjoy working with people who are experts at lots of different thyou
And we distribute our content as widely as possible on multiple platforms. I think Nidhi mentioned that you want to use technology that meets your learners where they are, and that was in the context of Instagram. And we very much believe this. Smart History is distributed on our own website, smarthistory.org, but also on khanacademy.org, on YouTube, on Flickr, and on Instagram.
So Smart Histories is a community of hundreds of scholars and experts in various fields, but obviously it's important to us even more now to strengthen that community. So that's a real goal for us right now. And in fact, we just hired a third full-time member of Smart History who will work on that specifically. And we're also really concerned about the pipeline of making sure that people who have never felt that the discipline of art history was for them can feel like they can participate, that they can become curators and museum directors and art historians and teachers. And so we're taking on interns and thinking about that pipeline very seriously.
In fact, we had 3 wonderful interns, excuse me, from an HBCU this summer, and really excited about them. They were fantastic. This fall, we're going to be trying asynchronous workshops for teachers, and we're also prioritizing working with international art historical organizations to bring in more international voices.
So that's a kind of quick overview of how we got here, and we're happy to talk more, of course, and answer any questions. And you can always reach us at Beth or Stephen at smarthistory.org. And we just want to, we're just very much appreciate the invitation to be here today and to see these amazing projects and talk about the importance of being iterative, of starting small, of not developing grand strategies. Those are all things that we found to be really successful to Smart History. So I think it's back to you, Betsy.
Thanks so much, Beth and Stephen. We really appreciate your context, and I want to bring up all the panelists now for our Q&A session. So a reminder that you can, of course, put questions into our Q&A box at the bottom for Beth, Stephen, and all the other presenters. So first, I do want to turn to Beth and Stephen while we get everyone else up. You've worked extensively in the interdisciplinary space between tech, the arts, and education. And so think about the projects that we just presented. How do you see those projects fitting into the growing discipline and industry around those issues? Oh, Beth, I think you're muted. There you go.
I know.
Oh, still muted.
There we go. Those are big questions. I think technology has so much to offer. We think smart technology has so much to offer education, not just in terms of scale, being able to offer. I mean, when we're talking about art and art history, so few people have access to that it's heartbreaking. And so making that accessible, using technology to make things, to scale that up is incredibly important to us. And of course, I'm looking at Michael and thinking about all the important work that he's done, thinking about scale and what's possible with museums and GLAMs with scale. I think it's something that we haven't yet really even scratched the surface of. I mean, Smarthistory has basically as many YouTube subscribers as the Metropolitan Museum of Art, not to denigrate the Met, because we're huge fans, obviously, of museums, but we're two people. And I think there's so much more opportunity there to take advantage of. Stephen, did you want to add?
I would just reiterate that, you know, when Beth and I were teaching in the classroom, which we both loved, we were reaching a few hundred students a semester, and now we're reaching millions of people. And it's, I think there is an opportunity for museums, for all arts organizations to think locally, but also to think internationally. And I think that goes, that is true for education as well, for schools as well. They have their immediate charges, of course, but there's also an opportunity to take their best practices, to take sort of the extraordinary things that they develop and share those globally and share those widely. And I think that.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
Go ahead. I just want to add one thing, which is that I think that your question, Betsy, is exactly the reason that Smarthistory works, right? We're not a museum. We're not a academic institution. We're not a tech institution. We're not, we're not exactly, a typical educational institution. And we're not anything that fits into any box that is pre-existing. And this poses problems for us, but I think it is, in a way, one of the reasons for our success.
Great, thank you. And so I want to turn to the cultural engagement team, so to Dana and to Mike. And so this question comes from Rachel Ropeek, who's the learning director at the Aspen Art Museum. And Rachel asks, how did you address the GLAM workers' varying level of familiarity with remote learning tools? Sounds like your Zoom meetings were great and engaging, but what about when the GLAM staff were working with their own audiences?
You want to jump in on that, Dana?
Sure, I'll start and then you can add. And hi, Rachel. It's great to know we've got some friends and colleagues out there listening. In terms of the meetings that we ran, we were very mindful about slowly and mindfully introducing technology. So for example, we use Google Jamboards for our virtual collaboration in our meetings, but before we sent people in to use the tool, we walked them through it. We decided not to overwhelm people with too many platforms or technologies in our actual meetings, because we were aware that there were different levels of technology experience, and everything worked quite smoothly in all of our sessions because we didn't try to load too many things in. In terms of the work that the GLAMs did with their constituents, from what we understand, it worked smoothly because they worked with their communities and audiences where they were. And if that meant doing something over FaceTime instead of Zoom, not having video on, whatever needed to happen to work with their audiences, they adjusted and made it work. So I don't know if you want to add any of that, Mike, but it seemed like that wasn't the issue. The issues were more around making change happen and getting work done, not so much the platforms.
I think, no, that's really well put, and everyone's on a learning curve about how to work with various communities, and those are just the communities that are wired. There are so many important communities in the US and globally who can't get online yet. I'm just remembering the Arts and Minds talked about, they developed museum programs to provide services to patients with dementia and their caregivers. And during COVID, they noticed many new kind of incredible, inspiring behaviors from caregivers, people getting online for the first time, getting on Facebook for the first time, so they could be a part of this. And we heard from a lot of the participants in our little humble project that they were taking the tools and techniques and kind of the vibe that we were working with together and introducing them to their colleagues as well. We're all learning from each other in this process.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that. Really important thoughts. And so I want to, sort of bring in the suggestion box team now. And you know, we've talked a little bit throughout this conversation about change. And when you first started your project, you actually had a slightly different version of what you thought you'd produce. So we thought it might be interesting for the audience to learn a little bit about how your project plan changed over time and how you think that reflects on the future of COVID-19 and other types of quick turn grants where you have to be able to pivot on a dime.
Yeah, that's a great question, Betsy. I think, and we're so grateful also for the flexibility, because our initial idea was formalized when we were thinking about the initial needs that schools had right at the onset of COVID shutdown, when we had no idea how long this would last, and there were not actually a lot of resources or support available to teachers to be able to respond and pivot very quickly their in-person classroom to a remote model. But as the months went on that we've been in this situation, and we had deeper conversations with school leaders and educators, students and families, we understood very clearly that the needs that they had were very different. They were more around how to make decisions, how to take the next step forward, how to deal with the uncertainty of not knowing how long this would last, in planning for the fall rather than in responding immediately. And there were also a slew of resources available that were borderline, actually not borderline, just very overwhelming for educators to make sense of, and we didn't want to be yet another one of those resources. Yeah, I think that's kind of the genesis for the suggestion box. And also, as schools became more aware of which perspectives they were missing from those conversations, it became really clear that a solution needed to take a form that would be very usable by communities whose voices are often not heard.
Awesome. Really important ability to pivot, and I think an important lesson for everyone. And something to think about when you're working with grantors is, can you be honest with them to share the need to pivot and have those conversations? And we really appreciated your upfrontness in that project. I'd like to turn back to the cultural engagement team. You worked with many types of organizations, from museums, libraries, theaters, performing arts, etc. And Zhao Liu from McGill University asks, how did you identify those partner organizations? And I want to ask a follow-on to that, which is, how did you tailor your approach to different types of quite diverse organizations?
Mike, I'm going to let you respond to that, but there you go, you're unmuted.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. No, thanks. Yeah. We, both Dana and I had been doing a lot of work in the cultural sector and with arts and humanities and civic institutions when COVID started. So we had kind of a sense of what people needed as human beings and what the organizations wanted to do and what the capacity was. That went into how we developed the scope for the grant. And when we got a notice that from Betsy and her team that we were one of the finalists, I put up a blog post and started tweeting, outlined what we thought we could do and that we were sharing money with the participants, and linked that to a kind of a tailored copy of our proposal. So full transparency, we're basically paying you to come on this journey with us because we think it'll help everybody. And people self-selected, although we did work really hard to make sure I really wanted a public library system. And I was super psyched that Jen Stencil and the Akron Summit County system stepped up. And I really wanted a performing arts group. And I really wanted a group in the South that was closer to African-American or diverse local communities. So we got really lucky, something about the appeal of working fast and getting some help. And then when people signed up initially, we sent out, Dana and I designed a questionnaire to get a sense of what people wanted, to your question directly, Betsy, what they expected, what they knew, what they thought they could handle in terms of schedule and workload, and we tailored from there. And then Dana particularly maybe was really great about, we were constantly updating our design for sessions based on what had happened the minute before. Do you want to say anything else about that, Dana?
Yeah, we were just very nimble and responsive to what was happening with the groups we were working with and in the world. And actually, I see there was a question asking about Black Lives Matter, and that was definitely happening while this project was happening. So we took time in the beginning of our gatherings to talk about what was happening in the world around us and how it was impacting our participants and their communities. And we just worked really hard to be responsive and aware of what was happening and how we could meet their needs. So we were very much aware of what was happening outside in the world and what we could do in that moment to be responsive to it.
Fabulous, thanks. And I want to make sure Yusuf gets a quick answer here. So I want to ask about how can you avoid extra isolation that comes with this new normal of online work and school? Any lessons from the suggestion box about how families, educators should be thinking about this?
Really good question. I think first and foremost, start with just kind of reflecting on the situation. It's not easy. It's challenging, as Dana and Michael have shared, and as Stephen and Beth have shared. It's a moment where we're going to try things and sometimes they're not going to work, and that's okay. And, you know, for parents on the call, don't beat yourself up, right? It's like reflect on what happened, reflect on what you tried, and then don't do it alone, right? Find other people that you can learn with and from. I think that's the main lesson from our work, and I think that's the main kind of reflection that we're trying to share with other people.
Fantastic, and that's a perfect transition to my last question, which is always, what's the bumper sticker that you want folks to take away? So the one really brief, really pithy, what's the thing that people should learn from this? And I'm just going to go down the line for who I can see. So Beth, you're up first. Yeah.
Thank you. Share, and share openly.
Great. Dana, what about you?
Mine's inspired by something Beth said, which is be fearless and generous.
Fantastic. Mike, what about you?
Vote.
Vote. Excellent. Nidhi, that's a bumper sticker, all right. Nidhi?
Mine would be destigmatize failure.
Great. Yusuf?
Sometimes less is more.
And Stephen?
I think it is being willing to try, being willing to fail, and as everybody else has said throughout the session, to be generous.
Fantastic, great words to end on. So I'd love to thank first and foremost our funders, the Ford Foundation and the Omidyar Network, for making this challenge grant possible. I'd love to thank our team, Mai Sisla, our new Deputy Director, Meha Aluwalia, our new Program Coordinator, Maddie Libby, our fabulous summer intern who sadly will be leaving us soon, Sevilla, Ben, Carner, the whole Aspen Institute team. I'd love to thank our COVID-19 grantees, Dana, Michael, Nidhi, and Yusuf, and I'd love to thank our keynotes, Beth and Stephen. Our next webinar will be September 30th at 9 a.m. Pacific or 12 p.m. Eastern, releasing 2 more grantee projects focused this time on using technology to trace the effects of COVID. So we hope you'll join us for that session. In the meantime, we wish you peace and policy impact during these difficult times. Thanks again for joining us.